Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be part of the American Climate Leadership Summit this year, and I'm inspired by the diversity of voices working together across sectors at this conference to develop solutions to the climate crisis. I was asked to provide a perspective on engaging politically conservative communities on the issue of climate change and offer some tangible ways that land conservation is succeeding in this space. Just a quick introduction to the Land Trust Alliance and Land Trusts. To start off, a land trust is a nonprofit organization that, as all or part of its mission, actively works to conserve land by acquiring and stewarding land or conservation easements. The vast majority of land trusts are local. They're community-based organizations. Volunteers and staff live in the communities where they work. Land trusts are working in 93% of U.S. counties, and their areas of focus are as varied as the communities where they work. The Land Trust Alliance is the national association, voice, and source for the knowledge and capabilities of the land trust community and private land conservation as a whole. As the national leader in policy, standards, and education, we work passionately to support land trusts across America so they can save more land and better serve their communities. The Land Trust Alliance also conducts a census every 5 years. Our most recent census is based on data as of the end of 2020. It documents that America's land trusts have collectively conserved more than 61 million acres over the past 4 or so decades. That's an area larger than all of the land contained in America's national parks. But the impact of conservation can be measured in terms other than acres. Over the past 4 decades, land trusts have demonstrated again and again that land conservation can be a powerful and popular source of good, providing clean air and water, habitat for plants and animals, local and secure food, and places to come together as a community to recreate and recharge. For the U.S. to tackle today's biodiversity, climate change, and other environmental crises, it must take full advantage of solutions offered only by the land sector. These solutions must involve the conservation and management of vast amounts of privately owned land. Research shows that Americans across the political spectrum understand they have a role to play in solving the climate crisis, including employing land conservation, restoration, and stewardship. One of my go-to sources to keep a pulse on where Americans are relative to climate change is the regular polling conducted by the Yale Program on Climate Communication. About 7 in 10 Americans think global warming is happening based on their polling. By contrast, only about 1 in 6 Americans think global warming is not happening. And we've been hovering around 70% now for many years running based on Yale's polling. Despite the country's polarizing politics, large majorities of registered voters across the political spectrum and in every congressional district in the country support reducing the pollution that causes global warming through investments in renewable energy research and infrastructure and regulating pollution. Majorities of Democrats, independents, and Republicans support each of these approaches based on their polling. Indeed, land conservation brings people together from across the political aisle and is one of the truly nonpartisan issues around which people of all backgrounds and passions can come together. Our community derives great strength and power from that fact. We see how land and our shared desire to protect and maintain it bring us together. Our fractured and divided nation needs this now more than ever. After all, conservation includes strategies to address climate change, and it's a win-win. Who doesn't like nature protection and conservation? The Great American Outdoors Act is an example of how land conservation unites the country. In 2020, this was a bipartisan victory for a bipartisan cause. The U.S. House of Representatives voted 310 to 107 in support of the legislation. The Senate voted 73 to 25 to do the same. And because of this law, the Land and Water Conservation Fund will commit $900 million each year to protect critical land, water, and recreation areas that benefit all Americans and the climate. When it comes to engaging conservatives on climate change specifically, the goal isn't to win their hearts and minds to bring them to our side. By and large, you can't change people's minds by refuting their arguments with facts and figures. You must understand their position from their perspective. Listen to understand with an eye toward identifying common values, concerns, and solutions that excite. Identifying shared values and experiences and working from those to find common ground and solutions is critical. And that's how we approach our work with land trusts in helping land trusts socialize climate change as one of the goals behind their land conservation and stewardship work when working in their communities and engaging their constituents. Most of us, despite our political or ideological affiliations, are anxious about the future, in part based upon the worrying impacts we're experiencing every day. Supporting land trusts and engaging in private land conservation provides a straightforward and tangible way for an individual to have a positive influence and a role in addressing the changes we're experiencing and that our children will face even more. Land conservation provides solutions that everyone, including farmers and ranchers, can get behind and excited about. That's especially true when land trusts and government programs bring resources to the table to help motivate landowner and citizen engagement, especially solutions that empower people to take action and assert their personal efficacy in making their farms, their communities, and futures safer and more resilient to climate change. Miriam Horn's book, Rancher, Farmer, Fisherman, speaks to these concepts and what they look like on the ground in the U.S. One of her examples profiles a politically conservative farmer by the name of Justin Knopf, who owns land in Kansas that has been in his family for 160 years. Over time, he has incorporated a regenerative approach to managing his land, including no-till, heavy rotation farming, which has helped to build healthy soils on his land. Justin's own words say it all, and I quote, "I don't know if our more severe weather events are part of a long-term trend or not, but it's not important for me to know. What's important is this: if it's happening, what steps am I taking to make my little bit of land a more buffered system against an extreme climate? And if it's not happening, well, everything I'm doing makes sense to do anyway," unquote. There are also illustrative stories from the land trust community that showcase land conservation as a vehicle for bringing people together to support conservation and climate action. I want to give you two examples. And the first one comes from Nebraska, where in that state, a bill was recently introduced that would have denied conservation-minded farmers, ranchers, and other private landowners the right to make a deeply personal and financial decision to permanently conserve their lands for public goods like agriculture, wildlife habitat, clean water, climate resilience, and scenic views. The bill glosses over the importance of perpetual conservation by allowing for extensions of conservation easements after 99 years, while making these extensions very easy to deny. This and other provisions of the bill would effectively end permanent conservation on private land in Nebraska. Using individual property rights as their most effective argument in favor of perpetual conservation easements, the accredited Nebraska Land Trust did not work alone to address this information about conservation easements that surrounded the legislation, as described by Dave Sands, the Land Trust Executive Director. The Land Trust has worked to create a broader range of allies, including private landowners who have donated conservation easements primarily on their land to push back on this misinformation that has been spread by the governor and others. Nebraska Land Trust produced a video featuring stories from landowners that was helpful in opposing the legislation and was sent to every member of the legislature's Judiciary Committee. The bill is not expected to move out of the committee. What's more, Nebraska Land Trust now has more conservation easement demand from landowners than any previous period of its history. I'll leave you with one last example of how land conservation and land trusts can activate communities to address climate change. When the Northwest Arkansas Land Trust came to the realization that there was a vacuum of leadership within the broader conservation community in the state on climate action, they made a plan and stepped into the breach. Clear to them from the beginning was that their role was not so much focused on the causes of climate change or laying blame, given the conservative community in which they operate, but concentrate instead on engaging their community about the role of nature and conservation in protecting communities. They created messaging, including a new climate website that appealed to conservative audiences, by focusing on observed impacts like flooding and other impacts. Over time, Northwest Arkansas Land Trust normalized talking about the effects of changing climate conditions and the concepts of natural and community resiliency. They also engaged effective ambassadors and voices of those with whom conservatives could connect, like farmers. Northwest Arkansas Land Trust has been at the tip of the spear in this space. They put their necks out there and led, and other organizations are now following their lead. They discovered the opposite of potentially alienating supporters and partners in engaging on climate change. In fact, they brought new supporters to the organization. Terry Lane, Northwest Arkansas Land Trust Executive Director and CEO, sums it in this way, and I quote, "We hold ourselves back when we tell ourselves that conservative audiences won't listen. We proved that conservation can be a rallying cry for people across the political spectrum to come together and take steps to build a more durable and resilient future. People are concerned and are looking for solutions to protect their families and communities. Collectively, we must be bold and bring solutions to the table through nature that everyone can get behind and support," unquote. So in closing, the places that we conserve and visit for renewal draw out the best in Americans. I think the highest purpose of land conservation is that it gives us places where we can rediscover what it means to be fully human and unite our common interests. And to that end, as the community of land conservation continues to evolve and grow, and as we all continue to evolve and grow across sectors, our challenge will increasingly be about brokering people's experiences with land so that they can be part of the story of the land and solutions to our most pressing challenges, including climate change. Thank you for your attention. Again, it's a pleasure to be here with you today, and I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your conference. Now I'm going to turn it over to our next speaker, to Greg Trainish. Thank you.
Thank you to Melinda, Danica, John, and Erin. It was inspiring to hear about the conservation partnerships being forged in the ranching and farming communities, as well as learning the latest on how scientific data and principles are being developed and implemented to avoid maladaptive effects of climate change for local farmers and instead creating climate solutions. Also, Erin's talk about conservative views on conservation and climate illustrate that we all, no matter our political beliefs, can find common ground and alignment to make real progress on climate action and solutions. Our next session speakers will discuss overcoming climate disasters. As most of us know, climate change is increasing with severity and likelihood of major storms, from raging wildfires in the Western United States to strong hurricanes hitting the coasts. Americans are feeling and seeing the impacts of a warmer world. Lisa Renstrom, Threshold Foundation, and a member of the Eco-America Board of Directors, and Dr. Samantha Montano from the Massachusetts Maritime Academy will now discuss the ways in which we can better prepare for climate disasters and support those impacted. Welcome, Lisa and Samantha.